To give us a little insight into how we experience sight, take a look at this brief video which provides an introductory explanation, kind of a How Sight Works 101.
Sight, a precious gift we can't take for granted. Our eyes are windows to the wonders of the world. All we know and love, experience and discover, ponder and cherish. Let's peer into the workings of the eye, a unique and self-sustaining system. The reflected light of the world enters through the crystal transparency of the cornea, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous humor to project onto the photoreceptors of the retina, whose impulses converge on the optic nerve, and then to the brain to be transfigured into imagery and imbued with meaning. Continual adjustments to the pupil and lens regulate the entry and focusing of light. In today's world, the eye's surface is constantly challenged to protect itself and adjust to changing conditions. Every blink helps our eye's natural defense system, the tear film, retain moisture and maintain visual acuity. Tears contain potent natural disinfectants to keep bacteria at bay. And the tear system washes away impurities to maintain eye health. The miraculous biology of our eyes inspires us to develop ways we can protect and maintain comfort for these remarkable structures. For all the wonders our eyes provide throughout our lives, we owe them our attention and ongoing care.
The eye truly is amazing in its complexity. It's amazing how sight works, how it gives us an awareness of what's going on around us. One function that this video did not point out is that when the image hits the back of the retina, it actually appears upside down. Now, I have no idea how that was discovered. Did someone actually crawl into an eyeball and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm upside down"? I don't know how they figured that out, but that's what they tell us, so they're credible people, and I tend to believe it. But according to science, between the back of the retina and the brain, as the optic nerve takes that visual signal, somehow the image flips right side up, and then we see everything as we should be, normally speaking. Sight is amazing. Look at the back of your hand. Now, you know the back of your hand pretty well. Notice the features on the back of your hand. Some of you are not following. You're looking at me right now. You're supposed to be looking at the back of your hand. Study the back of your hand, the pores of your skin, the hair follicles. I've got a little scar here that reminds me of an incident that took place. So you're looking at the back of your hand. Now, look at me, quickly. Look at me, look at the screens, look at the plants, look at the piano. Within that split second, there were literally hundreds, thousands of adjustments that were taking place that we knew nothing of. It just happens automatically in split-second time. It's amazing. Turn to someone next to you, look into their eyes, and say, "You have amazing eyes." I dare you. Now, if you're not sitting next to your spouse or your significant other or some member of the family, this has nothing to do, it implies nothing other than to just comment on the amazing function of the eye. Are we all clear on that? Okay. We have other senses which give us an awareness of our surroundings. We have hearing, we have smell. This all contributes to being in the know as to where we are at and what we're doing. We have feeling. Sight, however, is that instrument that gives us probably the most awareness of our surroundings. And it's absolutely vital. You all drove here today by means of sight. Buildings are built with sight. Fields are planted with sight. Surgery happens through sight, and thousands of other activities, all because of sight. Sight, at its basic function, is utilitarian. It enables us to know. Now, there are many activities that can be done without sight. Music can be experienced without sight. Food can be eaten without sight. But sight is so important to us. A few years ago, Michael Behe, a biochemist from Lehigh University, concluded that the complexity of the eye is an argument for an intelligent design and an intelligent designer. Because the eye and its function is something which he identified as irreducibly complex. Something that is irreducibly complex is a system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning, or it doesn't function at its optimum. You take away one of those features of the whole system, the whole mechanism of the eye, and the eye goes down or the eye is compromised. The eye is an exhibit of evidence of what David in the Psalms reflected upon in view of an intelligent designer, a creator. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. Another version puts it this way: we are wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. The Bible tells us that we have been created in the image of God. According to Genesis, we are told that we are crafted after His likeness. Does not that then imply that if we have eyes and we are created in God's likeness, that God has eyes? In fact, it implies even more, that God has an anatomy in some aspects resembles ours. A body, ears, hands, arms, a face, a mouth. And yet God is beyond a body. He's not confined to a body such as we know, because as Jesus said, God is spirit. This all leads us to some edges that we don't have knowledge of. We don't fully understand it because we don't have either adequate information or deduction in order to know how God resembles us or we resemble God in some type of bodily manner. Interestingly, though, the Bible speaks of God in terms of a body, directly, or body parts. It speaks of God's eyes. It speaks of His ears. It speaks of His hands and a face. What does the Bible say? What does the Bible say about God's anatomy and specifically His eyes? We're going to go on a little tour this morning of the Scriptures and see what we can discover about God's eyes. The first reference to God's eyes specifically that we have in Scripture comes from Genesis 6:8. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Is that by chance that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord? The very first time that God's eyes are specifically mentioned. Or does this mention of eyes and grace together give us some insight into another aspect of God? His heart. Not God's anatomical heart, such as ventricles and valves and so forth, but God's soul, God's inner being, the essence of who God is. Does grace and eyes tell us something about God? Now, prior to this mention of Noah and grace and the eyes of the Lord, a seeing function is recorded in Scripture. In fact, quite a bit in the first chapter of Genesis. As the days of creation week unfold, Genesis tells us that God saw dry land, He saw vegetation becoming green, He saw the sun, He saw the moon, He saw the stars, and then at the end of creation week, when everything had been completed, God assessed it because He saw that it was very good. So the eyes of God have a utilitarian function to them, a seeing function. He who created matter indicates that He is aware of everything that's going on around Him. And then that seeing, visible function progresses not to just raw matter, but the awareness of beauty and goodness. Sight is an instrument for God that connects Him to good. However, the next time that we notice in Scripture that God specifically sees or He saw something is Genesis 6:5. And then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This condition has come about because all of the Bible doesn't employ a seen, sight, eye term. It is obvious from Genesis chapter 3 that God saw. He observed Eve and then Adam choosing to believe the lies of the serpent. God saw their infidelity toward Him, and then He saw their shame and their guilt. He saw their new awareness of nakedness and vulnerability. And though the Bible doesn't again employ a seen, sight, eye term, Adam and Eve, before Noah, found grace in the eyes of the Lord as the Creator pronounces the ultimate final doom and destruction of the serpent. And then God clothes them. He covers their vulnerability and their shame. Proverbs 15:3 gives a summary statement as to the seeing function of God's eyes and the scope of everything that He observes. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. In the Garden of Eden, God saw good. Good in what He created, good in what He gave. But He also saw evil. Evil in the lies of the devil. Evil in the results of those lies, which being accepted would bring. God's eyes. His eyes have an observatory function. They are instruments of visual awareness, information, intelligence. They are tools connecting to Him what is happening around Him throughout the universe, just as it is with us. Our eyes are tools that help us to understand what's going on around. But they are more than just tools. Subjectively, the eyes are something else. Jesus said, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness." Jesus' observation resonates with a saying that has been around now, not just for centuries, but for millennia. That the eye, or our eyes, are windows to our soul. And if that is true, then the soul, the substance of the Lord, is grace, because Adam and Eve and then Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Grace, eyes, Lord, are not just random combination of terms being the first time that the eyes of God are specifically mentioned in Scripture. Rather, it is filled with meaning, giving us insight into the person that God is. His eyes are the window to His soul. In a number of places in Scripture, the seeing, visual, observatory function of God's eyes are mentioned. But every so often, we discover something else in Scripture which tells us of God's subjective eyes. His eyes which allow us to peer into His soul. Deuteronomy 32 is revealing. Deuteronomy 32 records a poem or a song, Moses wrote shortly before his death. It's known as the Song of Moses. And in this song, Moses looks back upon the experience of God delivering, leading, and attending to the Israelites. Note what we discover in verse 10. Deuteronomy 32. He found him in a desert land, and in the wasteland a howling wilderness. He encircled him, he instructed him, he kept him as the apple of his eye. He, God, kept him, Israel, as the apple of his eye. This is a word picture. This is an idiom. This is a symbol. The phrase literally reads, he kept him as the pupil or the little man in his eye. Now, there's more than one connotation to this. The eye is one of the most sensitive organs of the body, and the word picture speaks of the protection and the care that one gives to his eye, such as the protection and care that God gave to Israel. So, speaking in terms as God would instinctively care and protect for his eyes, God cares for Israel. But there's more. There's a visual connotation of closeness here as well. How close do you have to get to another person before you begin to see yourself in their eyes? You have to get very close. God had gotten that close to Israel so that he could see himself, figuratively speaking, in their eyes. The eyes are tools, making us aware of what is around us. God's eyes inform him, making him aware of what is around him. But they are more than that. They are windows to the soul, windows helping us to look into the divine, helping us to see and know what is inside. On the inside of God, we see grace, grace available, grace offered to a world permeated with wickedness. Grace comprehensively, broadly explained as that dynamic provided by God, accomplishing for us and achieving for us what we cannot accomplish on our own. And through the imagery of the eye, we see a God who then values us and cherishes us and desires closeness with us, values us and cherishes us as if we were his own eye. Tucked away in a portion of Scripture that we are not as familiar with, at least most of us, is another window into the soul of God's eyes. 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. Don't let this slip away without notice. This is the God of the universe. The universe, an expanse of which we do not know. We cannot define or locate the boundaries of the universe. What does this mean? What is the scope of this? A few photos from the Hubble telescope will help us to get a grasp of how big the universe is. This first picture is of the Sombrero Galaxy, and this is not on the supersized menu at Taco Bell. Astronomers tell us that it is 28 million light years from Earth. The dimensions of this Sombrero Galaxy are as spectacular as its appearance. It has, I don't even know if I believe this, but it's on the internet and it's reported by scientists, so whatever. It has 800 billion suns, and it is 50,000 light years across. I think I got all those zeros in the right place when I took this off. I think I did. But it's mind-boggling. How about this photo? The Ant Nebula, a cloud of dust and gas whose technical name is MZ3. It resembles an ant when observed using ground-based telescopes. The nebula lies within our galaxy between 3,000 and 6,000 light years from Earth. Or here's another one. The Hubble telescope caught this picture one day, and it's believed to be kind of a galactic storm, a perfect storm. It's in the region of the Swan Nebula, some 5,500 light years away. And what we see in this slide is believed to be some kind of a combination of a bubbly galactic ocean of hydrogen and oxygen and sulfur and other elements. The universe is filled with stuff like this. It's amazing. Here's something called the Cone Nebula. The cone pictured here, get this, is 2.5 light years in height. I don't know if I understand that. This is La Grande Cone or El Grande Cone, whichever, I don't know if it's male or female. That space is equivalent to 23 million round trips to the moon. Go figure. I don't know how they figure this stuff. The universe, for all practical purposes, as far as we are concerned, is to infinity and beyond, right? You connected with that? Okay. That means that the Creator is infinite, right? The Creator is infinite, boundaryless. The Creator is the Lord. And the eyes of the Lord, with all that universe to look after, to manage, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro through the earth, looking for hearts that are loyal to Him, because when He finds them, He shows Himself strong in their behalf. Such are the eyes of God. These are the eyes of God giving us a peek into His soul, His heart. And it's amazing. Amazing. David the psalmist, millennia ago, looked up into the sky and he wondered, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him? He was already on the right track, and he didn't even have telescopes. And I don't know if Casting Crowns looked at the Hubble telescope or not, but more recently, Casting Crowns is contemporary psalmists, poets, songwriters, echoes David from years ago. Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Who am I that the bright and morning star would choose to light the way for my ever-wandering heart? Not because of who I am, because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but simply because of who you are. The eyes of God inform Him of what is going on, just as our eyes do for us. But they're more than that. They are windows to the soul. And on the inside, we see a God of grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. On the inside, we see a God who desires closeness. He desires intimacy with us, who made Israel the apple of His eye. We see a God of the universe, the limitless universe, whose eyes run to and fro, searching for those whose hearts are loyal to Him, desiring to show His strength to those for whatever challenges and trials and difficulties they may be encountering. Jesus talked about the eyes of God, His Father, when He said, when you pray, go into your room. And when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who, what? Sees you, will reward you. This is the same God that we met in Genesis, whose eyes are full of grace. It's the same God who not only regards Israel, but regards you as the apple of his eye, the same God who seeks those who are loyal to him. And God is looking for you to respond to his eyes. Does that one care? Is she looking after me today? Is he taking time to talk to me today? We've taken a rather short, selected tour of the Scriptures to find what they have to reveal about the eyes of God. We've not looked at every text, but these are indicative of the others. And what we've observed is representative of what we see expressed in so many, many other texts of Scripture. But there's another set of eyes that are critical to consider. Your eyes. My eyes. What are your eyes and my eyes in relation to God's eyes? What are your eyes and my eyes in relation to God's eyes? Two scriptures give us two answers. Here's one possible response. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Cannot see. Now notice the second possible response. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which He has called you, the riches of His glorious inheritance in the saints. What are your eyes in relation to God's eyes? Did you notice that the glory of Christ, or His glorious inheritance, is in both texts? The devil knows that when we focus upon Jesus, when we see Him as the center of our vision, His beauty, His glory, it eclipses all of the distortion and the distraction and the deception that would dangle in front of our eyes. When we see the glory of Christ, His face, when we desire what He gives to us, when we perceive how determinedly He pursues our hearts, then our desire focuses back upon Him. The eyes of our heart are enlightened, and He draws us close to Him. Over the years, our family has explored through backpacking quite a bit of the backcountry of Yosemite National Park and the John Muir Trail. These are the locations that you cannot get to by car, and they are far away from what the backpacking community kind of disdainfully refers to as the t-shirt and flip-flop crowd. Backpacking is for crazy people who don't mind sweat and dirt and sleeping on the ground. And one day, a few summers ago, while on a climb, lungs and legs are pumping and burning, our daughter Lexi said to me, "You know, I only do this for the views." And I replied, "Yep, me too. Because the views make it worth it. I do it for the views." What about your view in relation to God's eyes? What are your eyes in relation to God's eyes? Are you responding to His eyes? Are you placing yourself in a position where you can gaze upon His beauty? And are the eyes of your heart being enlightened again and again and again? Because I don't know about you, but I have to have fresh views every day. God's eyes are upon you this very moment, full of grace, desiring your heart. Arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus now finds himself in the courtyard alone. At least alone from anybody that was close to him. All of his disciples have fled, but then two come back. Well, they kind of come back. But they're not at all ready to identify themselves as his followers, particularly one, Peter. Did Jesus overhear Peter denying him that he knew him? I think Jesus did overhear Peter denying him. Because as Peter voiced that disclaimer, that rooster crowed, and immediately the gospel writer Luke tells us the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Peter saw God's eyes in Jesus. He was overwhelmed with his denial, his infidelity, but then he saw the grace that were in the eyes of Jesus, his teacher, his miracle-working mentor. And the eyes of God in Jesus led him to a humility and a depth of love for Jesus that he had never known before. Jesus also saw the eyes of Peter, and he knew how heartbroken Peter was, how ashamed he was of his fear and infidelity. And Jesus remembered the eyes of Peter on that resurrection day, because Luke again tells us that specifically Jesus appeared to Peter, individually to Peter, to let him know, Peter, you are still the apple of my eye. My eyes are for you with grace. My eyes are for you with closeness and intimacy. My eyes search for you throughout all the earth to give you strength. Will you cast your gaze? Will you set your eyes upon the vision of Jesus?